Thank you for joining me on the Bold Lines podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about dealing with childish parents. Let me tell you what I mean by childish parents. When someone comes into therapy and talks about their parents being childish or immature, it's really helpful to know what a client might mean or what they're experiencing. The best way to describe this emotional immaturity is when a client tells me that they feel like that they are older emotionally and relationally than their parents. Sometimes it feels like they have to soothe or take care of their parent in order for the relationship to continue. If you read the title of this episode and immediately reacted in terms of excitement, disgust, or confusion, this episode might apply to you. Emotional maturity is not about how much we like our parents, but how well they handle stress in life, family, and relationships. It's important to keep in mind that having a childish parent can be a little confusing. They still hold the authority of being a parent, but they have to be guided emotionally in order to act appropriately. I'm going to give a little preface and say I'm going to be borrowing some psychodynamic ideas. Psychodynamic theory, for anyone who is unfamiliar, is an examination into the past and how parents relate to children and children to their parents, as well as how that informs the rest of our lives. So let me define what I mean by childish. This is mostly related to emotional issues. This isn't how well they handle finances necessarily, although there's plenty of emotional parents that are terrible with money. This is more related to how these parents handle stress, particularly with their children. Something important to know, at least something that I believe, that there is a difference between biological and emotional age. An easy explanation of emotional development comes from Erik Erikson. You can look up his developmental stages. Super important and can give you some insight into what I'm talking about today. If you're curious where you or your parent might be emotionally, consider how old someone sounds when they are upset or overwhelmed. Take their biological age away for a moment and consider how well they consider creative solutions, how well they're able to self-soothe, or even the phrases or terms that they use. I could say as a therapist, I've met a 50-year-old with the emotional maturity of a toddler, and I've met a 25-year-old with the emotional maturity of someone in their 40s. These things are not directly exclusive. Now, you can only go so far ahead, because there's still life to live in order to learn valuable lessons. But you can always stay stuck. In short, you can only go on a little further ahead, but you can always stay a child. So let's look at this emotional immaturity and how it affects a kid. It can feel as if the child has to be the emotional parent. And this can start very, very early on. There's kids as early as 5 or 6 that feel like they have to manage their parents' emotional swings or even their relationship. Early on, this isn't a kid running interference necessarily or playing referee with arguments. It's that this kid is the one who helps soothe one or the other. The parent might vent to this child, or they might seek them as their only source of comfort. Overall, they have to manage their parents' emotions and outbursts. Parents depend on these kids to help calm down and make some sense out of the world. They use their kids as this safe place to go to. While a parent might be more financially successful, someone who is emotionally immature or a childish parent will continually struggle to maintain healthy relationships. You can see this pattern over and over. Let's say that you're an adult listening to this episode, and all adults have parents. Or let's say you're even an older teenager who's decided to listen in. This is something you might have seen play out over a number of years, either in a continual marriage of your parents or in variations between partners. It can become pretty obvious over time how old someone is emotionally when you look at how well they handle their marriage or short-term relationships. How quickly does it end? How do they talk about one another? When they say love or they're in a relationship, what does that mean? How do they treat sex and everything else? In short, it becomes pretty obvious that the parent can run around wildly, but the child has to be calm and centered. If you are someone who is relating to all of this information, this dynamic has probably been going on for years and years and years. Children of childish parents are probably used to this dynamic by now. If you're listening in and connecting, there's a good chance that your childish parent has been childish for a very long time, if not the entirety of your life. Childish parents will often say that their children are their friends. And I think there's a perfect example of a childish parent that most people can relate to. If you can remember the movie Mean Girls, there's a scene with Amy Poehler, who is the cool mom. Now, Lindsay Lohan and all of the other friends come to this house, and Amy Poehler talks about how she's a cool mom, how she can connect and be hip and all of those things. That is a very easy view of a childish parent. She's trying to relive these teenage years, and she cannot parent her daughter because she isn't emotionally old enough to be able to. But kids of childish parents are often called mature for their age. They really aren't, but they are sort of. Mature children, quote unquote, last for a long time until, well, it falls apart. Because they weren't allowed to have a childhood and they had to jump straight to emotional adulthood, they never gained the foundation they needed to be able to stay stable for the rest of their lives. So for those kids that were called mature for their age, was it because they actually handled childhood well and took on healthy responsibility, or were they called mature because their parents refused to be so? Here's how you know that this dynamic has completely failed. So let me take this from another perspective. Let's say you're listening to this episode and you might identify yourself as a childish parent, or maybe you're still that listener from before who is wondering how to explain this dynamic to a parent. Number one, kids still need to be kids. It doesn't mean that we allow poor behavior, but parents should guide kids along the way. Kids need to be impulsive. They need to take good risks. They need to do dumb things. Parents should provide guardrails and allow them to feel and explore and fail, but they're allowed to be dumb and do pointless things. Parents have to be adults, or kids never get to experience mastering the storm of growing up. Instead, they have these overall themes that they repeat until they break. Kids have to let off steam somehow. Unfortunately, if kids are forced to be emotional parents, there are a few things, at least in my practice, that I've seen play out over time. Some of these parentified children will turn rebellious and move away from the weight of their parents' issues and expectations. These kids really break my heart because they grew up in a home where they had to be emotional adults, were never allowed to be children, and then finally, when they decide to start paying attention to themselves, they're berated for it and told that they need to grow up. The problem is, they were never allowed to be children, so how in the world could they have grown up? Another problematic dynamic is kids might become younger than their parents to enforce caretaking. Let's say that a kid subconsciously can say that their parent is really, really young, but they still want to be taken care of. They might display even more immature behaviors than they see in their parents because kids do want to be cared for. And if they can't get it through natural means, they might end up enforcing the dynamic. Or kids might end up doubling down on being an emotional parent and pick a romantic partner that needs to be raised. Now, I'm not suggesting something inappropriate here. The child of a childish parent might find a partner to parent in order to repeat the same cycle they've been used to because it's all that they know. How else would they explain relational dynamics? It's the only thing that seemed to have made sense. One of the other big ways that this parentified child of a childish parent plays out is, where are the kids going to complain and run to? Kids need their parents to be a safe place for them to go. Unfortunately, if they are the emotional parent, they become incredibly isolated. Kids then can't go to their parent to seek refuge. They can't find peace in what's happening. Instead, they feel lost. How could their own emotions be addressed if they're too busy dealing with that of their parents? Kids have to take on these burdens indefinitely or risk family issues. If their parents are already immature enough and are already struggling with issues, them bringing up their basic needs could make things worse. And so kids learn to turn inside of themselves, because if they don't, they'll pretty much get nothing. We'll say, this is the most heartbreaking for me long term. I said before that the rebellion really breaks my heart. This is the one that really brings me sorrow to see in session. The reason for that is children feel as if they have to hold their entire family together. And I've had too many clients who sit in my office and spout things off. They recall memories only to see my horrified face. And they stop for a second and they think, wait a minute, that's not okay? Wait, I shouldn't have had to have managed that in my parents? Or you mean parents are supposed to be stable? Again, it is very sad for me because I want everyone to be healthy, but especially in the clients, this is a space in therapy where I just give a client time to breathe, because chances are they haven't had the opportunity to do so. They see that look on my face as they recount these horrible, horrible memories, or the ways that they've had to manage things that no children should have to manage, and they start to feel the things that were left out, that they shoved down after all of those years. So if I've sufficiently depressed you enough, or maybe I've excited you by explaining these things, we still need to talk about what to do with it, how we can heal and make sense of things. Number one, you need to realize where you are actually functioning. Now I've either told you that you are incredibly screwed up or you completely messed up your child. You might be cheering, you might be sad. Either way, let me explain some ways that can bring about healing. If you are the child of a childish parent, you need to realize that where you are currently functioning is not where you need to start. Now, it might sound a little odd, but follow me here for a minute and see if what I'm about to explain will make sense. True healing means that you have to experience what you missed out on. Now, this doesn't mean you have to go back and play with blocks again. Not what I'm talking about. This doesn't mean you have to become obsessed with monster trucks or princesses. Not required. There's some weird therapies out there that recommend that. I think it's stupid. Whatever. What I mean is this sense of wonder, this sense of exploration, of taking good risks, of wondering where you can have influence in the world. Those are the things that you need to go back and experience. I mentioned Erik Erikson at the beginning of this episode. Go look at his developmental stages. Go look at Piaget's stages and see what they have to say, and look at what you may have not been able to experience yet. Something to keep in mind. The stages, if you want to go look them up, Erik Erikson's stages or Piaget's stages, they are progressive. They build on one another. So if you didn't complete a specific stage, you can't move on to the next one. An easy example of this: if you haven't formed a secure identity, who you are, you don't pair well with other people. You can't really love someone if you have no idea who you are, because you don't know what you're matching. Once you do realize where you are emotionally, you realize the point at which you stopped being a kid in a healthy way, you have to work through those stages well. The good news is, if you missed out on emotional development as a child, and let's say that was 15 years ago, it won't take you 15 years to catch up. People can progress through emotional needs fairly quickly, say if there was some abuse or trauma involved, but you do have to take some time. And interestingly enough, in any case that I've done this, when a client is able to sit through and experience those needs, they feel better. They feel more at peace. Oddly enough, the ability to fail gives people a sense of relief. I want you to consider, if you are this child of a childish parent, to take responsibility of what is yours. You can only control you, and you are only required to take control of and take responsibility for you and your spouse, and for the direction of your children. I believe that a healthy marriage involves two people giving to one another. And so for that, you're responsible for it. You're also responsible for raising your children. That's not a shared dynamic. It's one that you have to take responsibility for. If you're taking responsibility only for what is yours and your childish parent spirals, let them. Much like I inform parents to help their teenagers by letting them fail, so you can do as well. Something that sounds awful that you can also consider is to learn the presence of apathy. It's an interesting thing to be able to care less. If you are able to keep a level head in high levels of stress, it can almost seem as if you have a superpower, especially with a parent who is emotionally regressive. They're very childish. If you stay level, all of a sudden they don't know what to do. In those moments, they may not understand, or they may accuse you of abandoning them. Objectively, it's hilarious when I hear parents say their children are abandoning them, because in saying that, they are positioning themselves as the child. You can also push back on what you cannot control. You only have so much energy to give yourself and those around you, and it's okay to invest in those who bring value and purpose to your life. Be stingy with those who refuse to do any internal work. Their happiness is dependent on someone else covering for them, and you certainly do not have to do that for parents who should have grown up before you. The last thing that I will say, you need to realize that you have to take time to heal and process. Once you realize that you have to progress past your parents, you have to accept that they were never able to raise you past where they were. If you aren't able to accept that and take the steps forward, your own children will suffer from either trying to fill in the gaps you cannot teach them, or your emotional absence due to practice on your own. This growth may include letting parents go to some degree. It doesn't mean you have to completely cut people out, but you may have less emotional investment in their processing in their daily lives. One of the deeper things that you can also consider is you may have to grieve the death of a parent that you needed but never got. That includes the fact that they refuse to do their own self-reflection. You might have to accept that there may come a day when they decide they will never do that sort of self-reflection and will leave you all alone to be a parent. I hope you choose to be a parent to your own children. If you do not do so, you will eventually fall apart, because you cannot take care of an adult who refuses to take care of themselves. Be enough for yourself so you can be there for you, your spouse, your children, and all of the others that are truly and healthily depending on you. Thank you for listening today. Hope you got something useful out of this episode. If you found it beneficial, share it with someone. And if you feel the need, you can leave a tip to help pay for the production of these episodes. Thank you so much for listening, and keep walking towards healing.